Good morning and welcome. I'm Ann Leonard, Manton Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the Clark Art Institute, and I'm very pleased to introduce this virtual opening lecture for the Clark's fascinating new exhibition, On the Horizon, Art and Atmosphere in the 19th Century. Now, this show is truly a breath of fresh air. It opens today and will be on view through February 12, 2023. Our lecturer this morning is the exhibition's curator, Rebecca Szantyr. Rebecca was formerly curatorial assistant for Works on Paper at the Clark, and since September has been working at the New York Public Library as a print specialist in the Miriam and Ira D. Wallach Division of Art, Prints, and Photographs. Now, those of you familiar with the New York Public Library will know that few institutions in this hemisphere can compare with it in the breadth and diversity of its printed collections. So it gives me great pride and pleasure to see Rebecca take forward her passion for prints into this new role and build on the training and experience she received at the Clark. Hi, Rebecca. But she also has extensive prior background at other institutions, which I'll tell you about briefly. Rebecca earned her PhD in History of Art from Brown University. During that time, she served 3 years as the Florence B. Selden Fellow in the Department of Prints and Drawings at the Yale University Art Gallery, where she prepared an exhibition called Seriously Funny: Caricature Through the Centuries. She held previous roles at a long list of distinguished museums, the Frick Collection, the RISD Museum, the Yale Center for British Art, the Cleveland Museum of Art, that was alongside her master's degree from Case Western Reserve University, and the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center at Vassar College, where she received her BA. So you can see why we had a great deal of confidence when entrusting Rebecca shortly into her curatorial assistantship at the Clark with the preparation of an exhibition for our Eugene V. Thaw Gallery for Works on Paper. The proposal she came up with was creative, ingenious really, because the theme is so deceptively simple: air. Air, sky, and atmosphere are largely invisible elements that tend to escape notice. But as Rebecca has shown, artists have long paid close attention to them, and in the 19th century especially, changing scientific understandings of air and atmosphere led to new forms of expression in visual art. From Constable's and Turner's skyscapes to panoramic vistas taken from above and sometimes very high above the Earth's surface. Although it deals in historical materials, this exhibition takes on a keen contemporary resonance through its engagement with issues like industrial pollution and climate change. And in addition to its wide thematic range, the exhibition takes a similarly inclusive approach to artistic media, bringing together drawings and watercolors, prints, photographs, books, one painting, and even a porcelain cup and saucer from our decorative arts collection. In sum, this exhibition holds many surprises and delights and a wealth of interesting information. So thank you, Rebecca, and congratulations on bringing this project to fruition. And just before I turn over the podium to you to tell us more about On the Horizon, I'll just remind our participants that at the end, we will take time for Q&A, and you can enter your questions directly into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So over to you, Rebecca, and thanks again.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Anne, so much for that introduction. And since I'm no longer at the Clark, I wanted to take a moment to extend some acknowledgements to the team that really helped this project come together. So first of all, thanks to Anne for encouraging my ideas and seeing them through after I left. Angela, Nathan, and Teresa for ensuring a smooth installation. Annie and the publications team for their guidance with the text package. Laurie and Sophie for all their hard work on the multimedia guide. And Vicky, Derek, and Carolyn for the exhibition graphics and online presence. I also want to begin my talk today with a land acknowledgement. As I'm speaking from Midtown Manhattan, the Wallach Division here at the New York Public Library is sited on the unceded lands of the Lenape people. We recognize that the systems that support our libraries were founded on the exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples, including the Lenape. that erasure is inextricably linked to the climate crisis we face today. We honor the Lenape and other indigenous caretakers of these lands, waters, both their elders of the past as well as the present and the future generations to come. And so starting, I was really happy to have this invocation of stewardship of the Earth's surface as a point of departure for an exhibition that aims to encourage visitors to think critically about historical and future stewardship of the Earth's atmosphere. In selecting the title On the Horizon, I hope to capture the two concepts that unite the selection of objects and their arrangement within the Clark's Thaw Gallery. Firstly, that this exhibition examines the relationship between an evolving scientific and empirical understanding of the atmosphere in the context of aesthetic and representational strategies used by artists and image makers to render these ideas during the long 19th century. The work of natural philosophers and meteorologists, which developed in tandem with that of artists, denote a forward-thinking spirit that characterizes both disciplines' commitment to advancing ideas in this era. Secondly, the horizon line itself demarcates a discrete position. It is where the Earth meets the sky. But as a location, the horizon is unreachable. It is always ahead, moving further into the distance, a point to be apprehended visually, but never experienced as a sight itself. The imposed remove that the horizon line evokes runs counter to the conventional interpretations of view pictures. Landscapes, as an ideological construct in pictorial genre, often signal ideas of property, territory, enclosure, sovereignty, empire, and manifest destiny. Seascapes can telegraph an even greater sense of ascendancy. During the age of sail, such vessels served as metaphors for mercantile and military dominion. They become emblems of nation states that sought prospects beyond their boundaries. The artists of these scenes often use the horizon line as a device of suggestion, annexing terrain that is implied but not rendered, or in anticipation of reaching remote holdings. Yet the importance of boundaries and borders only existed below the horizon line of pictures, a zone of terrestrial and territorial matters. If land and sea provide an interpretive and compositional ballast for such view pictures, what is the role of the top half? How can these spaces be activated? It is with this in mind that I began a larger inquiry into the aerial space in two-dimensional representation. That is to say, the atmosphere and horizon line, not just far in the distance, but also near. As such, the objects included in On the Horizon consider the range of aerial dimensions, the prolonged vista of a distant view, the height and regions from gaining elevation, and the ambient atmosphere of our immediate surroundings. Invisible and imperceptible, air and atmosphere offer a representational challenge for artists and its other characteristics, its permeability, its formlessness, its changeability, and its ubiquity, also underscored its potentialities for artists and scientists alike. To illustrate the convergence of these different atmospheric considerations, I introduced a drawing that instigated the larger project that this exhibition represents. Completed in 1834, Nicolino Cagliost's monumental gouache composition purports to be a view of Baltimore and of the city's Fairmount Park. However, this drawing does little service to either of these subjects. Baltimore's skyline, with few discernible landmarks, stretches across the midpoint of the sheet and is otherwise too shallow in its development to offer a true topographical portrait of the port city. Similarly, Cagliost's depiction of the park lacks in description. The shadowy heights of the park in the foreground function as a repoussoir, drawing the viewer deeper into the scene towards the brick architecture of the city, which gives way to a pink and blue sky. And it is within this sky space that we observe the true subject of the composition, a balloon ascension. Minuscule in scale and constituted as the same subject it traversed, air, and it is fittingly rendered in the same blue and pink hues of the surrounding skyscape. This aircraft floats above and eventually away from the city of Baltimore. The dramatic staffage figures populating the lower half of the composition suggest and model the public's excitement over the event. Callio's drawing records not just the flight of the airless James Mills balloon, but the local audience's engagement with the significant breakthrough in American air navigation. Yet it would be incorrect to interpret the public's interest exclusively with the extension itself. In the days preceding, Mills not only promoted the coming event in Baltimore's papers, but he invited the city's, quote, scientific gentlemen, unquote, to inspect the deflated balloon and his accompanying tools in advance of the flight. Despite his choice of words, the rarefied individuals that Mills' polite but gendered address evokes is not as narrow as it sounds. Rather, the aeronaut purposely flatters his reading public by appealing to their intellectual and aspirational interests. This is to say that the general audience could also be a scientific audience. This idea of the larger public's engagement and participation in the scientific advancements over the 19th century lies at the heart of this exhibition. Under Mills' rubric, the artists featured in On the Horizon were members of this all-encompassing, non-specialist scientific audience. As individuals of their time, the artists created works born out of their own curiosity about the atmosphere, or to appealing to an audience who also possessed a similar period awareness of the topic. Divided into 5 sections, this exhibition surveys the different modes artists and audiences encountered, experienced, or expressed in treating the air and atmosphere as pictorial subjects, as these ideas altered and grew over the course of the century. Okay, first section. The first section of On the Horizon examines the changing ideas about air in the latter part of the 18th century and first decades of the 19th century. These ideas grew out of the initial studies of the early modern era's scientific revolution, and closer to this exhibition, the discovery by scientists, then called natural philosophers, during the Enlightenment. With the invention of the air pump in the mid-17th century, natural philosophers were able to study air and the gases found in the atmosphere. The apparatus's vacuum function permitted hypothesizing, testing, and illustrating air's fundamental role in the processes such as respiration and combustion. The essential and critical role of air in the human experience is on full display in one of the first artworks visitors will encounter in the galleries, a mezzotint by Valentine Green, engraved after a composition by Joseph Wright of Derby. The dramatic lighting in this composition underscores the stakes of the experiment at hand, in which the pump is used to remove air from the bird's immediate environment, eliminating his respiratory flow. Fluttering into the lower registers of the vacuum's glass chamber, the cockatiel manifests distress, confirming that the very substance of air is key to respiration and by extension life. The multi-generational members of the family group gathered round the table display a range of reactions that reveal their responses to the experiment: emotional, intellectual, and philosophical. Next to Wright and Valentine's print in the galleries hangs an etching by Jean-Jacques Duboisseau as a pair of young boys amusing themselves with soap bubbles. Duboisseau's subject was borrowed from early compositions that featured bubbles, genre paintings from 17th century Dutch and 18th century French paintings, such as these examples. Oh, I'm sorry, didn't put that in. In these earlier works, the delicate and ephemeral nature of the bubbles serve as metaphors for other fleeting and fragile concepts, such as the precarious nature of unstable contemporary financial markets, or the passing phase of childhood, a phase relatively free from the worries of adulthood. But created more than a century after these artworks, it is impossible not to consider Duboisseau's composition without taking into account respiration. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong. I'm in a different workstation and I keep on. There we go. It's impossible not to consider Duboisseau's composition without taking into account respiration. If in Wright's composition, respiration challenged the natural philosopher's use of the vacuum, the activity of Boisseau's print accomplishes the opposite, with bubbles giving shape to air, their forms created and inflated by the boys' exhalations. With the older boy's gaze and bubbles reaching upward, air navigation is also called to mind. The earliest examples we will soon see had already taken flight. More poignantly, the buoyant soap bubbles became a foil to the domesticated flightless bird, tethered to its perch. Rather than playing with bubbles, a more rigorous approach to experimenting with air's properties, individuals in the late 18th century may have turned to illustrated texts such as this book, which could be purchased or used in a course of study. I was very excited to include this object in On the Horizon. Priestley's multi-volume tome may have been printed in England in 1790, but a few years later, this book had found its way to Northwestern Massachusetts, where it joined the Williams College founding library, indicating the wide and ready interest for learning about these recent discoveries regarding the study of air and pneumatics. Priestley's text did not require that readers have access to a laboratory or the equipment and apparatuses featured in these pages. Instead, the book's accompanying multi-figured, carefully labeled illustrative plates explicated the experiments and theories discussed within the book's chapters. The viewpoint of the illustrations is angled downward, allowing readers to imagine themselves presiding over the table of scientific instruments. Attention to the book's binding exhibits similar care, with the printed content of the plates only beginning beyond the foredge of the book, permitting readers to simultaneously consult text and the illustrated figures. And in this picture, this is the frontispiece. This is the only one where it folds out to the left. The rest of them have it folding out to the right, where the paper under the printed text is blank so that they can be side by side. Switching disciplines from science to art, Pierre de Valenciennes' pedagogical text, like Priestley's, was aimed at both casual readers and serious students. The primary audience for this publication were amateurs who were ready to apply themselves rigorously to their artistic practice, but for reasons or time of location, were unable to join the more formal instruction of an academy or atelier. Seen here in Valenciennes' diagram for linear perspective, which the artist demonstrates the accurate scaling of figures receding in a landscape. Ambient air between objects in a landscape was the source of aerial perspective, which Valenciennes described as having a weakening effect on colors, despite its own transparency and colorlessness. The artist is best known for his promotion of working en plein air, or out of doors, which he esteemed as the best method for capturing the essence of a landscape, particularly for amateurs. En plein air, as a method and subject, became the subject of a trio of these very small watercolors. Each are about a few inches. They're trimmed from sketchbooks, made by Auguste Xavier Leprince. As an artist who worked in genres of figure and landscape painting, the intimate scope and scale of these compositions impart a narrative to Leprince's own practice. Venturing into the countryside to draw from nature, he finds equal inspiration in others who have done the same. Leprince's choice of the more difficult and considerably less convenient medium of watercolor distinguish him from the amateurs he depicts, who work in graphite. Made in a pocket sketchbook, the drawings have an informal quality. He only provides ground lines and perfunctory greenery to suggest his plein air setting, with a vignetted approach blends into an imagined exterior setting, where the ground of the paper becomes the nebulous atmosphere around the figures, of sunlight refracted on a sparkling day. A more pronounced atmospheric haze lies at the literal center of the last artwork in this exhibition's first section. The blue hue topography in the far distance conforms not only to Valenciennes' observations pertaining the weakened colors of the parts of a landscape at a greater remove, but this optical effect is also one of the ideals of the picturesque. Exceedingly popular with both British artists and the viewing public around the turn of the 19th century, the young Girton and Turner relied on the formulaic conventions of such picturesque views, darker foreground, brighter middle ground, and an indistinct background to appeal to patrons. Sunlight refracting around air particles distorts our optical perception of the distant hills, causing them to appear blue rather than green, a phenomenon known now as Rayleigh scattering, named after the British physicist John William Strutt, third Baron Rayleigh, who successfully proved this molecular theory in the 1870s. Armed with a new understanding of the atmosphere's materiality and dimensionality, artists in the first third of the 19th century turned their attention upward. This section opens with an oil painting by John Constable, which we may consider a predecessor to his period of intense cloud studies, based on the artist's attention to atmospheric effects. Land masses of cliffs, Sandy Beach, and Portland Island in the distance, constitute only a small percentage of this composition, with the artist devoting 2/3 of the canvas to the windswept sky. Painted while on his honeymoon on England's south coast, this trip introduced Constable to climatic patterns and conditions that differed from those he observed in London and his native Suffolk. As a result, this tour has been credited with emboldening the artist's use of color and brushwork. Between 1821 and 1822, Constable embarked on a series of isolated studies of cloudscapes, a practice he referred to as skying. Working quickly to record fleeting conditions, he completed studies in oil paint in under an hour, and work such as these, captured in watercolor in a small sketchbook, may have taken mere minutes. The catalyst for Constable's sudden commitment to this brief project may have been his exposure to recent theories by meteorologist Luke Howard, who created a classification system for cloud formations, still in use today. Like Constable, J.M.W. Turner recorded the momentary effects of cloud formations and movements. His closely observed studies served as multiple purposes: as part of a drawing practice rooted in curiosity, as exercises to perfect technique, and as studies for more finished compositions in watercolor or oil. Turner was particularly captivated by coastal scenes, a setting of frequent and rapid changeability of climate, where wind and water came together in dramatic squalls. Although these two works differ in their level of finish, we can observe a shared visual element and tension of a listing ship that is momentarily in a clear passage. And it might be hard to see on your screen, so I'll just use my cursor here. All of this is done in watercolor, but there is a line sketch of a ship right here that's might keel over. Popular in the 18th century for reproducing painted portraits, the intaglio medium mezzotint was adopted by artists for landscape subjects in the 19th century. Watercolor conveyed the texture of atmosphere, crystalline skies, foul weather wind, but the lush ink of mezzotint was better suited to communicate the atmosphere's sense of mass, the strength of an invisible wind, the voluminous clouds, which can be seen at left in this print after one of Constable's oil paintings. Another British artist, John Martin, selected the medium for its ability to suggest a heavenly richness in a deluxe illustrated volume of John Milton's Paradise Lost. Able to render both rich, deep shadows and ethereal lightness, Martin also uses the medium to depict a partially embodied figure of God the Father. And in case you're having all this right here, he blends into the crowds, his robes, but there's his hand reaching out to create the light. Sections 3 and 4 are grouped together as they both address a period fascination with efforts that broaden one's perception of the horizon line by gaining elevation in one of two ways: hot air balloons and panoramic views. By venturing further upward into the troposphere, which is the first layer of the Earth's atmosphere, the one that's closest to its surface, or more commonly, consuming visual material that is represented with this experience, period audiences came to learn more about their environs. The first hot air balloons emerged in the last quarter of the 18th century, and at first were envisioned as instruments that could provide a means to test pneumatic theories rather than develop a mode of flight. Physicist Jacques Charles hypothesized that hydrogen, which expands when heated and is lighter than the air of the ambient atmosphere, could be harnessed to power a balloon aloft. This Teacups vignette commemorates one of the first successful trials in balloon aviation. And collaborating with the brothers Jean and Nicolas Louis Robert, Charles launched his rubber-lined silk balloon on an unpiloted flight in August 1783. The aircraft landed more than 20 kilometers away in an agricultural community where it was purportedly met by frightened peasants. This public interest in balloons grew and continued into the 19th century with a greater emphasis on the details of flight, distance, height, and duration. One of the boosters of this burgeoning technology was Gaspard Félix Tourneschon, known by this single name moniker Nadar. Ever the early adopter and entrepreneur, Nadar, a caricaturist turned photographer, recognized that balloonomania served as an opportunity to distinguish himself professionally. In this lithographic satire, Daumier lampoons, but also sincerely celebrates his friend's innovative tactic to rise above his competition. But not unlike the scientists who developed pneumatics and aeronavigation, who sought to create new fields of study, Nadar also hoped that his invention of aerial photography would also raise the status of the medium, which, like balloons, he had foreseen could be used for multiple purposes. As balloons' reliability and design improved, aerostats, or aircrafts that are lighter than air, became a vital component of advanced meteorology. Scientists like James Glasher, a founding member of the Meteorological Society and Aeronautical Society of Great Britain, undertook day-long journey in his balloon, reaching heights of over 35,000 feet and covering scores of miles, wherein he recorded the barometric pressure, air temperature, and chemical compositions of air at different altitudes. Glacier published his accounts along with those of several aeronauts and meteorologists from both England and the continent in his 1781 book. Filled with tables, charts, and woodcut illustrations, it is the book's tipped-in, colored full-sheet lithograph illustrations that most successfully engaged readers' imaginations. The accompanying image to Wilfred de Fonville's account encountering meteors in the upper reaches of the troposphere presents an otherworldly scene, complete with a brilliant violet sky that could not be experienced on the Earth's surface. Though the lithograph adheres to the aeronaut's narrative, the illustrator depicts a scene exterior to the author's point of view, with the illustrator including the balloon itself within the scene. By including the balloon as part of the larger composition, the illustrator not only allows the reader to envision their experience of such an atmospheric encounter, but that this feature also convincingly expresses the solitude and splendor that scientists confronted while traveling through previously uncharted territory. While balloon mania fed the public's taste for spectacle and aerostat ascensions, in the textual reports and visual chronicles of aeronauts' exploits, audiences' appetites for elevated vistas could also be met by artists and image makers adopting panoramic viewpoints in their land and cityscapes. This new mode of representation had much in common with the earlier traditions of bird's eye and prospect views, but their highly specific elements were borrowed from a more modern invention, the panorama, a form of spectacular entertainment invented in London in the late 18th century that quickly spread to the rest of Europe and the United States. After climbing a series of stairs, these purpose-built attractions, visitors disembarked upon a viewing platform offering unobstructed 360-degree painted views of familiar and distant locales. With their oblique vantage points, foreshortened details extending from the bottom of the composition, and their wide atmospheric vistas, features which were all exampled here in George Rowe's view of a lithotin. The artworks in this section of the exhibition mimic this experience of the panorama's viewing platform, despite the fact that the spectacle's heyday had already passed by the mid-century, already supplanted by moving panoramas. Apart from the Rowe lithotin, the artworks in this section are divided into two groups. The first group, occupying most of the back wall of the Thaw Gallery, evoke a panorama of Paris, albeit one furnished by printmakers, each working in their own style and in different mediums. Charles Miron's etching of the gallery at Notre Dame begins the panoramic procession. Angled as to create the viewer's approach to the tracery, the cathedral's Gothic stonework temporarily impedes our wide prospect. Instead, the etcher has intimated the singularity of this elevated perspective. We are in the realm of birds and among warm sunlight, two rare commodities at street level in Paris's medieval core. For his commissioned view of the college Henri IV, Miron made sketches of the city's leading secondary school from the nearby Pantheon, using the monument's dome as his elevated viewing platform. In a similar manner, Maxime Lalande incorporated his own elevated vantage points in the titles of his Parisian etchings. However, contemporary viewers may have been able to ascertain without such a hint, given this high specificity of his angles and foreground details, such as the sliver of the Jardin de l'Enfant in the lower left of his view of central Paris, or the course of the river and natural and man-made topography in his view along Paris's perimeter during the siege. Lastly, Auguste-Louis Leper's composition introduces a novelty to a familiar subject, not only by enshrouding the city's landmarks in a layer of snow, but by rendering the experience of the precipitation itself up in this wide open air, the falling of big, wet individual flakes and the bands of icy droplets whipped around in gust of winds. Marion, Lalande, and Leper were active in etching and woodcut revivals in France, movements that sought to re-energize the practice of fine art printmaking in response to the rise of new mediums like photography and lithography. But to convey this widespread appeal of the panoramic viewpoint, On the Horizon includes 4 covers of Harper's Weekly, an American periodical. Like panoramas in the early 19th century, these journals brought illustrations of far-flung locales to a mass audience. In Winslow Homer's design commemorating the centennial of the Battle of Bunker Hill, the artist utilizes an elevated vantage point to take readers back in time. The colonial Bostonians in this image have turned their roofs into viewing platforms, gaining perspective and a clear aspect on the conflict across the Charles River. The inclusion of figures at right in the illustration of Coney Island's new observatory function in a similar fashion, aiding Harper subscribers in envisioning their own visit to this attraction. With its wide distribution, the magazine presented panoramic landscapes of not just regional, but national interest, such as these views that showcase the picturesque scenery of the US Military Academy in the Hudson Valley and the capital's growth into L'Enfant's famed design for the capital's urban plan. The last section of On the Horizon closes the circuit in both the artistic and intellectual conceptions of air and the atmosphere in the latter decades of the 19th century, as well as the first years of the 20th century. My aim in the exhibition has been to present an involving relationship of period audiences' perception of their atmospheric environments, from articulating theories and identifying properties for invisible but essential substances, to close visual studies to express the experienced effects of climatological airspace, to a growing understanding and confidence that saw individuals venturing into the upper atmosphere, either in airborne vessels or via panoramic vision. The final portion of the exhibition considers when this relationship has become unbalanced, when human interest in the atmosphere moves from the purely science and technological to one that is commercial, or from originating from a place of knowledge production to one of exploitation. By definition, our current geological epoch, the Anthropocene, is characterized by the human footprint on the Earth's climate and environment. But during the 19th century, this impact, due to the Industrial Revolution and rapid urban growth, reached devastating new levels. Concerning air pollution, coal-burning factories and stoves were the main culprit, with smoke and particle emissions measuring multiple degrees higher than present-day levels, instigating a public health crisis. The works in the concluding section of On the Horizon examine how artists incorporated air pollution into their compositions, naturalizing the deleterious effect that this contamination had on the atmosphere and the overall environment. In these two works, we can observe how a varied intensity of air pollution has on our own 21st interpretation of a scene. At left, in Maron's etching of a French colonial outpost in present-day Eritrea, or New Zealand, a column of smoke wafts through the arboreal canopy and is easily overlooked, given that the artist utilizes a similar graphic syntax for the adjacent clouds. Based on the peninsula's plentiful coastal forest, it is likely that the fire depicted used wood as fuel, which is less efficient than burning coal, and also released more carbon dioxide. In the gnome-bound steamship in Beverly Bennett Dobbs' photograph from the Alaskan gold rush, the ship undoubtedly uses coal as its fuel, as indicated from the black exhaust streaming out of the steamship's smokestack. The ship and its emissions contrast starkly against the white ice and sky, emphasizing how out of place the vessel appears in the frozen waterways, creating a scene that present-day viewers may interpret as a metaphor for the larger overall environmental impact caused by the region's exponentially rapid growth and the extractive enterprises that enabled it. By comparison, J. McNeill Whistler's pair of nocturnes not only naturalized London and Venice's industrial pollution, but his tonalist approach aestheticized the lingering miasma that oftentimes enshrouded these famously damp cities. Hence, the moody shadows that imbue the composition are not just darkness of nightfall, but as the evening's dew, fed by the city's waterways, attracted the city particles from the city's furnaces. In each instance, the artist amplifies the characteristics of the chosen respective printmaking medium, with the touche of the lithotint imitating the smoggy London night, and the etching's variable plate tone intentionally left on the printing matrix, highlighting the contrast between the murky waters and fog of Venice and the metalworker's workshop emanating with heat. Like Whistler, Jean-Francois Raffaelli employed the qualities of different printmaking mediums to convey the atmospheric effects of air pollution. In this work, Raffaelli conjures up the smudgy, soot-laden sky through grainy texture of aquatint, layering shades of gray and black to convey a befouled skyscape. But unlike Whistler, the French artist does not ascribe poignant beauty to his realist pictures. In the late 1870s, Raffaelli turned his attention to those who he considered the, quote, people of his time, unquote, who populated the working class banlieues or suburbs that surrounded Paris. These districts were also home to factories and heavy trades. For Raffaelli, the elderly rag picker became an emblem of alienation, unsuited for the labor of industrial factories, but also displaced from his previous rural lifestyle, and now residing in a city, eking out a livelihood that is defined by solitary scavenging on the fringes of society. In depicting the honest economic and environmental conditions that exemplified life in the banlieues, Raffaelli's compositions offer critique to the disparities found in modern Paris. The polarity between these two sides of Paris are most pronounced in Raffaelli's La Bièvre, an intaglio print titled after the still river that coursed through a district heavy with industry. Best known for its noxious tanneries, seen in the densely congested lower left corner. They're right here. They're kind of sometimes almost hard to pick up in this picture. Raffaelli draws his eyes upward, the viewer's eyes upward to the city's horizon line, where the suburban smokestacks are juxtaposed with the graceful domes of the center city landmarks, an area that was another world for Raffaelli's figural subjects. And so just some concluding thoughts, as I know we've gone a little bit long. I wish that we could share better news about the ecological health of the atmosphere. Although the levels of coal emissions are no longer at the height that they were in the 19th century, not much has changed since Raffaelli's day, with low-income areas consistently reporting higher rates of poor air quality. We might also wonder if he was alive today, would Turner be excited about the extreme weather patterns we now find ourselves in? Probably not. Or can we think of mezzotint as a medium that would be best suited for capturing holes in the ozone of that raying light? But I didn't want to end on a negative note, since while we can't give positive news about the environment and the air pollution, I did want to note upon how a new generation and previous generations of artists have continued to use the air as an invigorating subject for artworks that are even more participatory than those that we might see in the two-dimensional works that are really the bulk of On the Horizon. So that although the 19th century has concluded, the air and atmosphere continues to be a subject for artists, such as Elijah Clark's Stone and Air project from 1966, where the power of the air is used to balance a stone, but also shift shape. And more recent projects like Turrell's Skyscapes, one which is nearby at Mass Mocha. So if you come see On the Horizon, you should try to combine the two to have a 19th and 21st century exhibition. And then artists like Paul Chan, who are making projects about displacement of war with his air-inflated humans, because the air is so important to human life. So thank you for listening, and I hope, since we're all meeting virtually today, that you can make it to the galleries at some point to see on the horizon. And I'm happy to welcome any questions. A question from Kathleen about whether there are any works by artists. No, sadly. I'm running down the list in my head. That's something I definitely took into account in building the checklist. But unsurprisingly, where we thinking about people who are working in or coming up through the art field in the 19th century who has access to studios. For example, when looking at the La Prances in the first section, most of the figures that populate those scenes are, amateur women artists. They are finely dressed, they're not working artists, but they are engaged with an active practice, but there are no works by women in the show, unfortunately. But they do get represented, I think, in other ways. Thinking about the Sèvres teacup, teacups and saucers are often considered gendered objects that appeal to women, even though Balloonmania, there was all sorts of kind of ephemeral and merchandise, like a printed scarf or something that might be printed with a balloon, or there are prints definitely, such as those in the show, but elsewhere that feature balloons, which appealed to both men and women as consumers. But thank you for the question. Is there an exhibition catalog? Sadly, no. This is being recorded. I don't know if it goes live for future viewing. I believe it'll probably be on the Clark's YouTube channel. There are other projects that I can point you to, though there's no publication associated with this, but there was an exhibition in Britain a few years ago about air by Christine, is it Paulson? Sorry, I'm having a camera shy. I'm trying to think of her last name, but it covers on a lot of similar themes. Bennett says, thank you so much. Yes, I have seen, and I was going to put a question about whether American landscapes and their didactic religious experiences, similar themes in the works that I've done. There is a wonderful series of prints called, if you look at my email that's on, let's see, on this one, send me an email, and there's a series of prints from 1840 engraved by William Bennett that is called like American Atmospheres. And at the very top, it almost looks like the back of a dollar bill with sunlight streaming down. There's like the hand of God shaking. It's very religious in tone. So that would be something to keep in mind. Oh, thank you for that exhibition, Professor Clayson recommendation. I will have to check that out. Oh, a very good question about accessibility, about having captioning. Thank you.
Well, if there are no more questions, I think what's left is to thank you, Rebecca, again for all your work on this exhibition and for really elaborating so many of the rich themes in this lecture. I was, of course, familiar with the material, but I've learned a lot from the additional remarks you made today. So thank you so much. And thank you also to our listeners, attendees. I'll just reiterate the invitation to come to Williamstown, see the exhibition before it closes on February 12th. And wish you all a wonderful Saturday and Thanksgiving week. Thank you.
Thanks.